The Doug local user groups called Doug Meetups are growing. Find your local meetup today by visiting the Doug Hub on the left menu bar. Please welcome our heroic sponsor, Purely CRM, and their dynamic speaker, Ron DeGiusti. Today, he will be presenting their session, Using DevOps to Deliver Agile Dynamics 365 CRM Projects. Faster delivery, better results. Presented by Purely CRM.
My name's Ron. In this session, we're going to look at using Microsoft Azure DevOps to deliver Agile methodology projects for Dynamics CRM. And hopefully this will enable you to have faster delivery of your projects and better, more consistent results. Today, I'm going to talk about, I'll just give you a brief introduction on who I am. We'll go over the Agile methodology. We'll take a closer look at features and user stories. It's really important to be able to distinguish between those two things. I'll give an example of something in CRM. I'll give an example of a generic feature and user stories for a product. We'll then go and take a look at what a CRM project actually looks like in Azure DevOps. We'll look at the states of work items in DevOps, the states of features, user stories, tasks, bugs. We'll look at how we use pipelines to push our solutions between environments, like from dev to QA to staging to production. It's no longer the days where you need to go in and export your solution to a zip file, import it in the new environment, and publish it. We can automate that process. As well, we'll look at how we can develop and execute test cases against user stories to allow for more consistent testing, better quality testing, because our user stories are going to be written better, and it's going to be better to actually test against. And I'll give you a recap of what we've seen. So who am I? I originally started implementing the Pivotal CRM product. I'm from Vancouver, Canada, and Pivotal is a Vancouver success story. It was us and Siebel back in the old days. I've been lucky enough to do projects for companies like General Electric, Visa International, Wix Home Improvement in the UK, Chevron, and lots more. I've been working with the Microsoft CRM product since around version 3, which would be roughly about 17 years ago. A bit about the company I helped found. It's called Purely CRM. We're a boutique consulting CRM company. And not only are we just a CRM product company, we only focus on the Microsoft Dynamics CRM product line. An overview of Agile. Agile starts just like most projects do. You build the backlog, or at least enough of a backlog that you can begin doing your project work. The backlog is your listing of requirements that you're going to work on. Now, those do need to be broken into features and user stories. We'll get into that. Once the backlog is built, we go through a stack ranking exercise where the most important things are put at the top of the pile and the things that can be done later get moved to the bottom of the pile. This stack ranking is done with the assistance of the customer, the client, and so they are aware of the order in which we're doing our work. We have a sprint length in Agile. It usually varies from 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks. After playing with the numbers for a while, I'm very happy with a 2-week sprint. In 2 weeks, we can deliver something and have it demoable. In a sprint, in an Agile methodology, there's 5 rituals we usually follow. At the beginning of the sprint, we have a planning session. And because we've stack ranked our user stories, it should simply be a case of picking the items off the top of the stack and putting them into the current sprint. Not all of them, just enough. Of course, we don't know how many we need in the first one because we don't know the team velocity. By velocity, I mean how many story points can we do in a sprint, and have we estimated our user stories correctly. That's another presentation that you can look at later on how we do our sprint sizing, user story sizing. There is a daily stand-up. Daily stand-up takes 15 minutes, that's it. And we simply go through the sprint backlog in a Kanban board, reading top to bottom, right to left, starting with the activities columns for the tasks. We go down, we hit the first task somebody's working on. We ask, are you really working on that today? If not, please move it back to the new column. If it is active, do you have anything that's blocking you from finishing your work? If there's nothing that's blocking you, let's keep it inactive. If there's a deep dive on any of the backlog items, we immediately parking lot it. And parking lot items are held until the very end of the sprint to talk about, the stand-up to talk about, not the sprint, the stand-up. And in that discussion, the only people that are required to stay for the parking lot are people that have a vested interest in the parking lot item. That way we don't waste anyone's time. The stand-ups are supposed to take 15 minutes. It's what I book. I can generally get them done between 7 and 8 minutes. We also have the weekly sprint grooming session where we're always looking at the user stories that are coming up for future sprints and ensuring there's adequate detail in them, they're well formed, and the development team can build their task list off that user story. We also want to ensure in the grooming session that the acceptance criteria for the user story are listed. At the end of the sprint, we have a demo to the customer, show what was delivered in that sprint. And at the end of the sprint, we also have a team retrospective, and it's Vegas rules apply. We keep it just amongst the development team. The client is not involved, and we discuss what went well, what did not go well, and we pick one thing and only one thing that we can improve for the next sprint. Features and user stories. People often get these confused. The customer comes to us and they say, this is a requirement. A requirement. Well, is a requirement a user story or a feature? Most people throw it into the user story and start filling that user story up with detail. And that's generally not the case. When a customer says a requirement, what they're usually meaning is a feature. We write features in a standard way where we always begin them with the words, enables you to ... Or we'll write them and say, you can now ... For example, a feature might be, you can now spell check in Swahili. That is a feature. That is not a requirement, it's a feature that involves a number of user stories. The description that's found against a feature is what forms the release notes. Because what we release, and by release I mean a push to production, that's what a customer calls a release. We also have releases that go to QA, that may go to staging if you have a staging environment, and also production. But the releases that go to QA and staging, the customer doesn't really think of those as releases. When they hear the word release, they think a production release. User stories also follow a standard format where the user stories begin with need to ... The full way we write them is as a I need to because, and the acceptance criteria is written given, when, then. As a, and we want to know the job title of the person doing something. That helps us with planning security down the road. The because statement as a I need to because, the because statement helps us so the client doesn't say things like because that's the way we've always done it. Well, that's not good enough. We need to dig deeper and say, is that process really required in your overall feature? You can think of features as an entire swim lane diagram. If you have a swim lane diagram for a process, that process is the feature. Every single box in the swim lane diagram is a user story. And the acceptance criteria, given, when, then, fall in the lines of you've got the box in the user story. It has an arrow coming in, the box, and the arrow going out. The box coming in is given this happens. When I do this, then that happens going out. So that's the given, when, then. Examples of features and user stories. Let's take a look at a pair of scissors. A feature for a pair of scissors might be you can now cut paper. So that feature, which would be like a bullet point that you would see on a box, that feature has a number of user stories. The user stories are probably need to grab the blades in my hand, need to move the blades up and down in opposing directions, need to fit a piece of paper between the blades. Those are the user stories. The feature, you can now cut paper. Need to grab the opposing blades in my hand, user story 1. Need to move the blades up and down, user story 2. Need to fit the piece of paper between the blades, user story number 3. In a CRM project, maybe we have a feature that the customer has asked. I want a task created when we get a signature on a receipt. Upon receiving a signature for a contract, let's say. So, okay, a lot of people say, oh, that's a requirement. That's a user story. What are my tasks? No, hold on. The feature is you can now automatically have a task assigned upon signature of a receipt, of a contract. The user stories would probably be something like you need to know when a contract is signed and who's the owner of that contract. You need to create a task to follow up and assign it to a salesperson. And the third user story might be you need to have a salesperson see it on their dashboard. So you can see the feature of enabling task assignment upon signature on a contract. We had 3 user stories. I need to know when the contract is signed and for which salesperson. I need to create a task and assign it to that salesperson. And I need to have a salesperson see it on their dashboard. 3 user stories, 1 feature. So let's jump into DevOps. What does it all look like? So you can see here in the left-hand menu of DevOps, I'm in the backlog. And in the backlog, we've got a listing of epics, features, user stories. Underneath the user stories, we have the tasks. Now, I'm no longer of the opinion that epics are required in a project. I don't like them. It's fine. They can exist as a way to group features. But in my opinion, the feature is what we're delivering in a project. We deliver various features at different marks along our timeline. And so really we can just start with the features. And you can see all the features listed here begin with enable, and all the user stories begins with need to. And that's how we keep our user stories and features, and we write them all in a backlog to start. And that's how we initially build the backlog, in the backlog section. Once we finish with the backlog, we then move over to boards. Now in boards, everything is generally in the to-do column. This is from a project that's halfway along. So there's stuff in the doing column and the done column. The reason I go to the boards is it's very easy to stack rank on the boards. You can move items up and you can move items down just by dragging them up and down above each other and below each other. Very simple. Then our daily stand-ups occur by clicking sprints, and we look at the sprint task board. You can see in the far left all the user stories, and in the right you see the tasks, because that's what the DevOps, that's what the daily stand-ups are about. They're about going through the tasks assigned to people that are associated to user stories. The tasks have a status of new, active, and closed. Bugs can have a status of new, active, resolved, and closed. We'll talk about the states later. When we hold our daily stand-ups and we go through our task board of the sprint task board, I read it right to left, top to bottom. I start on the active column, I go down, and I look for the first tasks that someone's working on. And my question to them is, are you really working on this today? If you're not working on this today, move it back to the new column. Or if you finished it, let's move it to the closed column. If they are actively working on it today, the next question is, are you blocked? Or are you able to keep working on this? If they're blocked, we usually add a tag called blocked, and it shows on our card that is seen in the task board for sprints. Once I complete the active column, then I move to the new column and see if there's anything anybody can pull over into the active column today to finish doing their stuff. Let me now move over to delivery plans. So the delivery plans are a feature in DevOps that allows us to put our features on a timeline, on a Gantt. And then you can put markers at the top of the Gantt that indicate when you're going to do a release. So you can see all the features that are in your view here right now. They're not part of a release. This release is going to happen sometime in the future. But the ones happening prior to this pink marker here, those features got released at that point in time. Sometimes people call the delivery plan a high-level plan. The states of our features. Features have a state of new when you first create them. The only time a feature becomes active is when one or more of its stories are in an active sprint. If the feature has stories that are not in an active sprint, that are either closed or not started yet, if they're not started yet, it'll be new. Now, when all the stories in a feature are complete, then and only then do we move it to resolved. The team does one final smoke test, and then we set it to closed. I'm going to get to why I call it a smoke test to go from resolved to closed. User stories. I start them with a status of new, and they only become active when they're in a sprint. And all the user stories in an active sprint are active. Even if the tasks haven't started yet, all the user stories in the current sprint, the current iteration, are active. When all the tasks are completed for a user story, we set the user story to resolved. This is why we don't need a task against a user story to do testing, because the test cases need to be executed against a user story when and only when all the tasks are completed. And we know all the tasks are completed because when the developer moves all their tasks to closed and or all the bugs are also moved to closed, then it's the developer's responsibility to take the user story and move it from active to resolved. Now, the tester or the product owner or the BA or the functional consultant, whoever's responsible for doing the testing, says, okay, I can now test this user story, and they conduct their tests. If the tests pass, they set the user story to closed. If there is a bug, they'll move it back to active. Tasks. Tasks are simple. They're either new, they're active, or they're closed. New, you're not working on it at this moment. Active, you're currently working on it. When you finished your task, you moved it to closed. It really is that simple. Bugs, a little different. Bugs are new. When you're going to work on the bug, it becomes active. When you finish working on the bug, you move it to the resolved column. When it's in resolved, it's up to whomever is doing the testing to verify that the bug was fixed. If the bug was fixed, it's their responsibility to move it to closed. If the bug is not fixed, they move it back to active. And in the discussion thread for the bug, they can state why it was moved back to active. You no longer need to export your solutions, take the zip file, move it to the other environment, import it, and publish it. We now have in DevOps the ability to create a pipeline build job. The pipeline build job could involve publishing all the customizations, setting the next version in the release numbers that we have, the version numbers for the solution. It can involve exporting the solution, extracting the solution, and checking it all into GitHub. That's the pipeline build job. So when it comes time to move something from dev to staging or to QA or to prod, we run a pipeline, which running a pipeline is tantamount to running a build, doing a build. Except in the Dynamics CRM world, a build for us is creating the zip file. And then we push it to the next environment. So we run the pipe to create our build. And once that's done, we're going to create a release. And when we create a release, we now know exactly where it's been pushed to, and it's visual for the team. So in this case, I know release 168, which was solution 1.0.3.3 on Feb 10, moved at 12 minutes after noon into the QA environment. And I can even take a look to see who pushed to move it. We can also have controls that send emails to various individuals and say, please click this button to approve the push from QA to prod. Or from dev to QA, or dev to staging, or dev to prod. User stories. Simple. We go to boards, we click the ... next to a user story, we go down to add a test. Simple as that. We create a test name, and we open that test up, and we put down our steps and what the expected results are. And of course, this is based on the acceptance criteria written against the user story. Test cases, tests are done against user stories. Test cases are not written for tasks. Test cases are not written for features or epics. Our test cases are run for our user stories. When we want to run the test, we go next to our test and we run it. See here we have run when we right click. And it's going to pop open a 1/3 browser window that has all of the tasks and expected results listed for the test case, which ties to the user story. We're going to move that over to the left 1/3 of our screen, and the other 2/3 will fill with the CRM project that we're running. We'll click the check mark if it passes a test, and we'll click the X if it fails. And if it does fail and we click the X, we're going to click create bug. We can take a snapshot. We tie the bug directly to the user story now, and that bug and the user story are based on the acceptance criteria of what is written and gets put into the sprint that is active. Very simple. So I ran through the Agile methodology quickly. We took a look at features and user stories. Very important to know the difference between the two. We took a look at what a CRM project looks like in Azure DevOps. We took a look at the states of work items. For example, why you don't need a task to do testing, because it's based on the state of the user story. We looked at how we use pipelines to move our solutions between environments. And we looked how we can create and execute test cases against user stories. So I now just want to leave it open to some QA.